So, this is July 4th, 2015. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming here on your Independence Day to talk to Utah Theater Bloggers Association. I want you each to introduce yourself and explain which character you play that appears in 3 of the Shakespeare history plays here at the Utah Shakespeare Festival.
My name is Larry Bull, and I played Henry Bolingbroke in Richard II. I played King Henry IV last year in Part 1, and I'm playing him again this year in Part 2.
Excellent.
My name's Sam Ashdown. I'm playing Prince Hal. I played him in Part 1, and I'm playing him this year in Part 2.
And next year you'll be...
And next year we'll be playing him in Part 5.
Woohoo.
Part 5. Henry V.
Henry V. That's
Part
okay.
5. He skips 3 forward. Let's go straight to 5.
So each of you plays the same character in 3 different plays that progress through English history. How do your characters change over the course of the 3 plays that they appear in?
That's a great question. It's so hard to put it into any kind of capsule because there's so much that happens in all 3 plays that affects the characters. Henry goes from being an earl whose lands are taken away from him after his banishment from England by Richard II. He returns to England to reclaim his lands, which are extensive, as John of Gaunt's heir, who has just died. He gains so much force and momentum that he winds up taking over the crown. So he goes from this optimistic, political, kind of a juggernaut machine that just moves forward, very little reflection written in the language, to somebody who begins to reflect in the second play during his reign, which is beset with rebellion and civil strife. He becomes more panicked, more introspective, more nervous about the state of the kingdom and at the state of his son. And by the third play, Part 2, he's now dealing with death and illness and still unsettled feelings about the kingdom and about his son. So he's haunted by this claim of the crown and the throne for the entirety of his reign. And it's a fascinating development that Shakespeare has written, the way it spins and the way it moves forward.
Interesting. And Sam?
Yeah, we had a question about this at one of our talkbacks about whether or not Hal does change and how he changes, or if there's something that he knows is inside of him from the beginning and then that's revealed over the course of these 3 plays. And I'm not sure. I think that he starts in Part 1, he's not at court, he's not with his dad, he's not where people think he should be. He's in the taverns with his surrogate father, Falstaff, who he's learning from and spending time with. And yeah, I mean, over the course of Part 1, he's forced back into the court and then onto the battlefield, and then has a final showdown with Hotspur, where I think he luckily comes out, due to luck, comes out the victor. Yeah, and then in Part 2, he does it again. He's back at the taverns to start the play, and again, not where he should be. And I think it's more for, especially in Part 2, the world is changing around Hal. The country is sick. The country is sick with civil war and is literally sick. People are diseased, and Hal's in this transition phase between the kid that he was and knowing that he has to be king and he's going to have to try to save this country. So he's in this weird place where he doesn't fit into either world. He's sort of out of love with both of those ideas, and it's this growing up play for him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How do you prepare for a role that you're going to play for 3 years? Most actors get a couple months' notice that they've been cast in a stage play. You've known for a few years you're going to be in this production of Henry IV Part 2 this year. So how do you prepare literally years in advance for a role you're going to play?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I like to read ahead to know what the entirety of the story is. in a way, to inform what's happening in the play that we're working on at the time. And right now, obviously, working on the third installment, there's a lot of retrospection into the plays that came before, what was said.
Yeah.
Where did Shakespeare plant the seeds that are now sprouting? And that's the amazing long-term process of writing that he's done here, is that there are things he plants, little nuggets in the first part or in Richard II that are called back. I've also been reading some biographical info on Henry, a book called The Last Plantagenets. There's one, other books about Plantagenets and about the kings in general in England. And think about the story that's being told at the time and what's happening in the scenes.
Yeah, just going off of that, I mean, especially for you, your characters so much looking back at what happened and recalling what happened with Richard, being able to do that is so cool to be able to know what that is. Same sort of with Falstaff and with, I mentioned Gad's Hill in this play. Mm-hmm. We have this history, Hotspur's very present in this, or the lack of Hotspur's present in this play, I think. And to having done part one, it's really cool to have lived that out and sort of be able to make that personal.
Yeah, the ghost of Richard is in part two. The ghost of Hotspur, not literally, but their names are invoked.
Oh,
just like there's so many names invoked in part one.
Yeah,
that come up in Richard, characters from Richard.
So do you feel like doing the plays in order helped make that continuity easier for you to access and easier for you to understand and to draw upon that history of the characters?
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other benefits to doing the plays in order at the festival?
I think you get the benefit of a consistency in audience. The other day last Saturday we had a seminar in the Grove, and I asked how many in the audience had seen, at this point, all three, or if you count King John, all four of these history plays, and about 25 people, 30 people raised their hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of them. So I think being able to tell the story to people who are picking up from the last season, last episode, if you will, there's a great benefit in that.
Yeah, and I mean, you're growing up alongside the character as well.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we get to develop a 2-year-long relationship basically as father and son, and and even when you're not, where you asked about preparation, even when you're not actually working on it, you're sort of keeping the characters in the room. They're sort of still there. They're still present with you. So
thinking about it all year.
Thinking about it all year, and we'd send each other random emails every once in a while. Larry, me, and the director, Brian, things that we're inspired by or things that pop out and make us think of the characters.
What's an example of something that you learned about your character that you probably wouldn't have learned if you had only done one of these 4 plays by itself?
I think Henry's repentance at the end of part 2, his coming to terms with guilt, with real guilt. He does mention at the end of Richard II, wash the blood off my guilty hands. He doesn't talk about guilt in part 1, and in part 2 it comes back, and I think there's a real reckoning that happens for him personally with what is, there's a confession, and I don't think that necessarily see that coming. I don't think one would, just doing one part.
Yeah. It was also weird having this much time to research and look up stuff. You find out weird facts that you don't think are going to show up in the play, and then sometimes they do. I was researching about the wound that Hal gets in his face. He gets shot with an arrow, and the real wound, the arrow went all the way to the back of his skull, and the tip of the arrow couldn't be brought out, and if they couldn't remove it, then he was going to die. And there's I watched this documentary, this whole story about the surgeon who was the king's surgeon, who came in and had to create a device on the spot that opened up the wound, reached in, and then it could have another device that could hold on to the tip of the arrow, and if it was so close to all these things that would kill the future king, and they said if it had killed him, he would have also died, and created this device that pulled it out. So it's a bizarre, weird fact that doesn't have any relevance really to the story, but when we're doing the show and we have this the scar, we know what that is, and we know how serious it is, and it's not.
And the procedure was completely painless, right? It was absolutely no trauma at all.
Yeah,
for the patient.
aesthetic. Yeah, he was out. It was fine. Morphine. Yeah, I'm sure it was horrific.
That's amazing.
What are the contributions that the people behind the scenes are making to these 4 plays to make them a coherent sequence year after year?
Behind the scenes, you mean crew, designers?
Designers, director, crew, whatever,
Oh yeah.
whatever you want.
Well, Brian's hand certainly. Joe Payne's music, Vicky's set.
Yeah.
Like Sam was saying about the relationship that we've established as performers with each other, there tends to be, I think, when one continues to work with the same designer, a sort of shorthand. We're using the same set essentially with some different banners and stuff, but I think there's a shorthand and a trust that's established that makes for lack of a better word, all the non-essentials kind of get cropped away, and you can work on the meat of the thing, and do great things in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say it's kind of incalculable, the amount of support and consistency. All these people working together, it's pretty wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Here we are on the 4th of July, talking about a play that takes place in the history of England.
Mm-hmm.
What is the benefit to performing these plays about English history for an American audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think they are history plays, and they are English history plays, but they're so personal, and they're so, in my view, they're so much about fathers and sons, and about stepping into power and responsibility, that I think they're incredibly relatable, and I think incredibly universal
Yeah.
to this time and place.
I think that's one of the surprises Brian was referencing the other day about audiences who come thinking it's going to be a dry, dusty, historical thing about England.
Yeah.
But Shakespeare has written such a beautiful story about so many different things, about war, about repentance, about father-son relationships, about betrayal, about feeling of resentment from the part of the rebellion, the rebels, you know. I do think it's universal. I think there's a lot to be learned from the story he's able to pull from the actual history. Yeah, it's amazing stuff. It's amazing stuff, and it's very deep,
Yeah.
very rich.
In addition to producing all the history plays, the Utah Shakespeare Festival is producing all of the works of Shakespeare over the course of 12 years. How do the history plays in general, not just these 4, fit into the larger context of what Shakespeare's written?
I don't know.
That's a good question. I'm going to throw that one to you. I honestly don't know. I'd say that they're substantial in that they're stories of his home country, and I'm pretty sure a lot of them were commissioned for that purpose, out of a sense of nationalism and serving the court as a playwright and an actor.
I mean, it's hard to look at it that way, because I wouldn't approach it as a history play. I mean,
Yeah.
they're people that are, from events of history. But, I mean, I think the only thing that makes them maybe different than the other ones are the fact that Shakespeare's audience would know these characters, would know
Yes.
who they were, would recognize them. They would all know that Hal becomes Henry V. They would all know who that was.
It's as if we had a national playwright that was telling the stories of Lincoln and
Yeah.
Washington and
Yeah,
Thomas
absolutely.
Jefferson.
So it was present in their minds. But other than that, it's still a story about characters who are, I think, fighting for something, that are people and humans and fathers and sons. It's just in this different context.
Yeah.
So as an actor, modern actor, you don't really see as clear of a distinction in the storytelling between this year's Taming of the Shrew and Henry IV Part 2. It's still a story, it's still people who are fighting for what they want, and it's still about human relationships.
Yeah, I
point,
think so.
yeah.
I think so.
Interesting. What previous roles that you two have played have prepared you to play King Henry IV and Prince Hal?
nothing.
Nothing at all prepared you for this.
No, truly, it's unlike anything I've ever done before. Story-wise, persona-wise, I would say playing Bolingbroke in Richard II, if anything. You know, the question you asked earlier, what it is to do these plays in order, in sequence, and to have the same role. One prepares the next. But I can't think of many roles that I would consider even beginning to have the scope that the character Shakespeare's written of Henry.
Interesting.
Yeah. Maybe the entirety of my work up until now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Had you done any of these shows before?
The Henrys?
Richard II, Part 1,
No.
Part 2?
No.
Yeah. I mean, I had neither. I worked on like monologues of Hal and Hotspur, but had never been in the show. Brian has played,
Yeah.
Brian, our director, Brian Vaughn played Hal, Hotspur, played Henry V. So he came in with a very in-depth knowledge, but for us, I felt like we were discovering it together, which was great. It was,
Yeah, and for that reason and others, Brian is a fabulous director for this series.
Yeah.
Because he really knows the stories, and he really knows the Adams, and he knows these characters.
Yeah. And he's seen the shows from the inside, from
inside
multiple
out.
points of view.
He knows what it is to struggle with a passage or to,
Yeah.
or the scene. So it's great.
Shakespeare can be really intimidating, and a lot of our website readers and people who watch our videos are not as well versed in Shakespeare as you two gentlemen are. So what would you tell an audience member watching their first Shakespeare play?
Oh, for a muse of fire. Come in, enjoy the work, don't worry about things you may miss. Enjoy the things that you catch, and give it a shot, because our job is to make the language as clear as possible so that everybody can understand it, so that we can understand it ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's our job, and I guess just trust that it'll be a fascinating experience if we're doing our jobs.
Yeah, I think there's this misconception about Shakespeare that it's for intellectuals, or
Yeah.
it's something it's not for the everyman. I think it's the opposite of that, and I think that if you're going and seeing a Shakespeare play and you're not understanding everything right away, that's what happens to everyone. It's like a dialect. I mean,
That's right.
He's writing in verse, and it takes your ear a while to adjust to it, but it's like that for everybody. So I guess if you're not versed in Shakespeare and you don't see a lot of Shakespeare and you go to a Shakespeare play, know that it's difficult for everyone at the start, and then they become really alive, and then you forget. When I'm watching a Shakespeare play, I forget that it's a Shakespeare play, and I'm just listening to these people, and all of a sudden at the end I say, oh wow, I understood that.
Jumping into the pond is always a bit of a shock, but then you find out the water's great.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything you want to add for people who watch the video that they should know about either this production or the Henry IV Part 1 to Richard II, Henry V series in general?
It is a series. There is a larger story being told, but these are also standalone plays.
Yeah.
So nobody should feel that having not seen Part 1, they shouldn't find something to enjoy in Part 2 or in Henry V if they don't catch Part 2 this year.
Mm-hmm.
They're written to be standalone plays. In fact, many of them were standalone plays until Part 2 was written, right? I think he wrote Part 1 and he said there, and then realized there was so much demand for Falstaff,
I think that's right.
created Part 2. So.
Well, I checked.
Yeah, cut that.
Yeah.
I'd add that.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and we wish you the best of luck this season.
Thanks.
Thank you.